Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 18th of May of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours carried out a massive attack using hundreds of drones, dozens of missiles, and it seems that the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, have used a new rocket system. As we discussed during the previous video, the Russians were attacking the city of Dnipro. We have already discussed this picture where we can see lots of lines, yellow, orange lines, blue lines, and so on. And most of these lines are moving in two directions: the city of Dnipro, of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and the city of Starokonstantinov. The biggest number of strikes, explosions, were recorded on the territory of the city of Dnipro. This is exactly the settlement I'm talking about. And according to the video that was published from this area and that we have already discussed, seems to me the Russians used a new missile system. Once again, let's take a look at this video that was published this morning by pro-Russian sources. And in this video we can see a missile strike, a very heavy explosion. And when talking about this video and when talking about this attack, I have analyzed this missile attack. I have analyzed all lines between the sky and the surface of the city of Dnipro. I counted at least 3 lines, 3 white lines in this area. Which means that most likely the Russians used a missile that has just 1 warhead and just 3 submunitions. When talking about the Oreshnik missile system, here we have a completely different situation. Once again, let's take a look at the strike that took place in November of 2024. It's the first strike that's with the Oreshnik missile system that happened during the special military operation. And when talking about this attack, we have a completely different picture. Here we have at least 6 warheads and 6 submunitions. And this is the Oreshnik system. Once again, 6 warheads and 6 submunitions. But when talking about the attack that took place between the previous 24 hours, we have a completely different picture. We have just 1 warhead and 6 kinetic submunitions. This is a very important situation because there is a very big difference between kinetic submunition and let's say nuclear weapon. And of course, when I started analyzing this situation and possible missiles or missile systems that the Russians may use for this attack, I came to a very interesting article that was published in the internet. And the Russians have a weapon that has just 1 warhead and 3 submunitions, moreover 3 kinetic submunitions. And we are talking about the Pioneer system. The thing is that the Pioneer system is the system that the Soviet Union had let's say, in their military forces, and according to different agreements that were signed between the United States of America and the Soviet Union was obliged to destroy these Pioneer systems, and according to official data and official documents, the Soviet Union did this in 1991, or maybe it was already Russia who destroyed these Pioneer missiles. But when talking about documentations and when talking about the information that we can find in the open source, there are 2 types of the Pioneer system. The first type is 1 warhead and 1 nuclear submunition. And the second version of this missile is 1 warhead and 3 kinetic submunitions. And when talking about this video, it seems that we can see this situation. It seems that the Russians in 1991 didn't destroy every single Pioneer systems that the Soviet Union had. And it seems that today, on the 18th of May of 2026, the Russians used this Pioneer system, or at least a certain type of modification of this system. As of now, we don't have the pictures or the, let's say, satellite pictures of results of this overnight attack, but we have pictures of the first Oreshnik system strike. So, for example, this is the picture of the Yuzhmash industrial zone on the territory of the city of Dnipro, basically before the beginning of the special military operation. As you can see, we have lots of industrial barracks, and the Russians in 2024 attacked this industrial complex with the Oreshnik system for the first time. And after the Russians' attack, almost the entire building was completely destroyed. As you can see, the central part of this system was completely destroyed, and once again, the Russians were using the Oreshnik system that had 6 warheads and 6 kinetic submunitions. Kinetic submunition means that the Russians wanted probably not to create a very big explosion, but to destroy a shelter, destroyed a well-fortified area, bunker, or something like this. And as a result of use of the Oreshnik system, we see that this entire barrack was completely destroyed. Most likely, this entire building was destroyed from inside. Maybe some parts of the roof didn't fall, but I'm not sure that when talking about everything inside of these constructions managed to survive the strike of the November of 2024. Today the Russians use just 1 warhead and 3 kinetic submunition. But when talking about this video, and if we compare the video of this attack with the attack that took place in 2024, we can see that most likely these 3 kinetic submunitions had a higher speed in comparison with the strike that took place in 2024, which means that these 3 kinetic submunitions had bigger energy and bigger power. So which means that the Russians most likely during the previous 24 hours were trying to attack not just this well-fortified Yuzhmash industrial zone, but probably the Russians were trying to hit a bunker. As of the end of the 18th of May of 2026, we haven't received anything on the matter what exactly the Russians managed to destroy. The Russians made a statement. They said that last night, in response to Ukraine's attacks on civilian targets in Russia, the Russian armed forces launched a massive strike using land and sea-based precision weapons and attacked drones against Ukrainian military-industrial complex facilities, fuel and energy transport and port infrastructure facilities used by the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as military airfields, which means that the Russians attacked once again this Yuzhmash industrial zone, and probably they managed to deal damage, or they destroy a bunker which is also located in this area.
Computersalg har ændret navn til CS Megastore. Selvom navnet er nyt, er udvalget stadig mega stort. Køb en Samsung.
Now we have covered most of the updates regarding massive attacks, so let's wait and see, of course, what is going to happen next. But today, pro-Ukrainian sources stated that the railway services collapsed in this area. Trains are very massively delayed across Ukraine following overnight Russian strikes. Trains are running 9 or more hours behind schedule, according to Ukrainian Ukrzaliznytsia, the Ukraine Railways government office. Ukrenergo also reported power outages in the Dnipropetrovsk region after the shelling. Transport and energy infrastructure were hit. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. And first, let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where we have significant changes on the ground. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 17th of May of 2026, and this is the end of the 18th of May of 2026. As you can see, most of the territories that used to be considered as a gray zone were colored under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. I would like to remind you that the Ukrainians launched their major counter-offensive operation through the western Zaporozhye direction at the beginning of May of 2026. And as you can see, this is a very long counter-offensive operation that started on the 1st of May of 2026 and still continues. And now we probably understand what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to achieve with this counter-offensive operation. It seems that the Ukrainians are planning to recapture the settlement of Kamenska. Right now, in front of your screens, we can see how exactly the map has been adjusted since the beginning of May of 2026. And according to these changes, we see that the Ukrainians indeed launched a very powerful counteroffensive operation that allowed the Ukrainians to force the Russians to fall back from this area. Furthermore, and the most important, as of the 18th of May of 2026, we have a video that confirms the presence of Ukrainians in the central part of the settlement of Stepnogorsk. Another important thing is that most likely, and as we discussed before May's holidays, the Russians have concentrated two groups of forces. The first one in the area of the city of Melitopol, in the area of the triangle of cities of Melitopol, Tokmak, and Vasilievka, and the second group of forces is located, the second phase is located in the area of the city of Konstantinovka. And we discussed that the only way how the Ukrainians can ruin Russia's plans is to begin a counteroffensive first. And it seems that this is exactly what the Ukrainians are doing right now. But what kind of purposes the Ukrainians might pursue in this area? And probably, and the most important thing which is located in this area is the city of Energodar with its Zaporozhye nuclear power station. And as of now, the Ukrainians are counterattacking through the western Zaporozhye direction, and obviously they're still very far from the settlement of Energodar, but everything depends on how exactly the things are going to develop in the future. If Ukrainians continue their pressure in the direction of the settlement of Vasilievka, and if the Ukrainians are able to recapture these settlements, then of course they will be able to continue offensive operation further in the western direction. But from the other side, the Ukrainians may act a bit differently. I would like to remind you that since the beginning of May, we received at least several reports that Ukrainians began evacuation from the cities of Dnipro and Marganets. This information, if you remember, was published on the 12th of May. Mandatory evacuation announced in one of the districts of Nikopol, Dnipropetrovsk regional military administration stated. So the Ukrainians began evacuation of this area, the area which is located right in front of the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, which means that Ukrainians are preparing themselves before the beginning of an offensive operation in this area with the purpose to establish complete control over the Zaporozhye nuclear power station.
Hi guys, Mary and Tom are students at Atlantis University and they work part-time for a company.
But the most important thing, what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to do with the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, because the Zaporozhye nuclear power station is currently connected to the Russian energy line. So which means that even if the Ukrainians establish control over the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, it doesn't mean that Ukrainians will be able to use the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And for these purposes, they're going to have to use generators to support this power station itself. And of course, it's not a very simple task. So that is why the Ukrainians need a certain infrastructure if they want to take under complete control the Zaporozhye power station. And I would like to remind you that during the same period of time, we mentioned and noted a very interesting activity in the area of the city by the name of Pokrov. If we take a look at this map, at this version of the map, we might see nothing right exactly in this area, just fields, so nothing. Which means that 3 or 2 years ago, nothing was located in this area. So it was just a field. But probably after the Russians took under control the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the Ukrainians began preparation for a plan how to recapture the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and how to reconnect this Zaporozhye nuclear power plant to the Ukraine's lines, to the Ukraine's line and energy infrastructure. And since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians began creation and building of a very powerful substation, which is located right exactly in front of the new Zaporozhye nuclear power station. We are talking about this substation. As you can see, this is a new substation that was covered with additional protection nets and so on. So this is a more or less well-fortified energy infrastructure that Ukrainians have built in the area of the city of Pokrov. And obviously, the Ukrainians created this object of energy infrastructure just with one purpose. If Ukrainians recapture the settlement of Energodar and the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, the first thing that Ukrainians would do is they would reconnect the Zaporozhye power station with this substation, and basically the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant would be reconnected to the Ukraine's energy infrastructure. This will allow the Ukrainians to cut the Russia's lines, and that's it. And of course, if it happens, then most likely it would be a very difficult thing for Russians to recapture the city and to recapture this power station, because this is going to be not just a very powerful and dangerous object of energy infrastructure, this is going to be a nuclear object of energy infrastructure in hands of Ukrainian forces, which is obviously something that the Russians won't like. Which means we summarize everything and see that most likely the Ukrainians went all in with the Zaporozhye counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians and Zelensky himself doesn't have much time. They don't have much time, because not just the situation along the front line, not just problems in Ukraine with finance, with military help and assistance from the Ukrainian side. We see that the news of corruption is tightening around Zelensky. For example, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates on this matter. According to information we have, anti-corruption agencies in Ukraine are preparing to arrest Vladimir Zelensky's wife, Yelena, in several criminal cases. You know that this evening, lots of pro-Russian sources published a report that the wife of the President Zelensky left Ukraine with some bus filled with money or something like those. Probably these are speculations, nothing more, but this is something that is happening right now. And Zelensky understands that the only way how to break the situation, how to make people not to see all these corruption scandals, including his wife, is to gain a significant victory. And the only significant victory that Zelensky may try to achieve these days is to capture something small but something very important. Zelensky currently doesn't have time, forces, resources to, let's say, force the Russians to fall back from the entire territory, and this is obviously impossible right now to make this during weeks or months. But if we talk about the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, which is located just 6 kilometers from edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, this is something that most likely Zelensky considers is possible to achieve. So that is why in coming months, in coming probably even weeks, we'll see something big in the Zaporozhye direction, most likely where the Ukrainians would be involved in another adventure and another counter-offensive operation, which most likely could be the last one.
Til dig, der var ung i 80'erne. Til dig, der husker energikriserne og bilfri søndage. Vi lærte.
Now let's move further and let's talk about the Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received additional changes on the ground. It seems that the Konstantinovka front line either has collapsed completely or about to collapse. These are the changes on the ground between the previous 2 days. This is the end of the 16th of May of 2026. This is the end of the 17th of May. We have already discussed the situation. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, improved their position significantly through the western part of the city, and the Russians encircled the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine, which is located in the most southern parts of the city. So the Russians, according to different sources, yesterday created a cauldron, the first cauldron in the southern parts of the city. And today we received additional details about the eastern flank, and today several pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians improved their position significantly between the settlements of Novodmitriev, Kostenki and the city of Chasov Yar, which means that according to this report that was published by a pro-Russian source, more or less reliable source, this means that the Russians managed to create a second cauldron in this area between the villages of Chervona, Podolska, probably even partially Nikolaevka and so on. So this is the second cauldron that was created by Russians during the previous 24 hours. Of course, the Ukrainians will try to counterattack in this area, but the Russians have complete and total control over these territories with FPV drones. And if these updates are correct, and if in coming days we receive additional updates on this matter, then of course this is not just probably a huge and big problems, but this is already the beginning of complete collapse, probably even of the entire Slaviansk-Konstantinovka agglomeration area. At the same time, a record number of updates were recorded between the cities of Kramatorsk, Nikolaev, and Slaviansk. As you can see, lots of icons, lots of events were happened during the previous 24 hours. And here we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking using aviation, artillery, and FPV drones almost every single square kilometer of the territories between the cities of Konstantinovka, Druzhkovka, Kramatorsk, and Slaviansk. Everything is coming to a final battle for the Donbas Arc operation, and the question is whether the Ukrainians, whether the Zelensky, after the end of this battle, will be ready to accept everything, or the war on the territory of Ukraine will continue for the next year, years, months, who knows, and whether the Russians are going to change their demands after the end of the battle for the rest of the Donbas. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Middle East. I would like to remind you that we discussed that the most important signal